It is the beginning of March, so here's the recap of the books I read in February. Here is the stack, and I could say that February was a really good reading month for me. I read some amazing books. I usually rank books on 1 to 5 stars on my Goodreads account, and I know February was a really awesome month of reading for me because I had at least 3 5-star reads. So much to say about the books, and I can't wait to share. Like my earlier January book review, I will be sharing the books in chronological order from the first book that I started to the last one. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, book number one, we have Coming Up for Air by George Orwell. For those of you who do not know, George Orwell is actually one of my favorite authors. He's definitely on my Mount Rushmore. You may know George Orwell from his classics like 1984 and Animal Farm. However, I really wanted to challenge myself and read a book from his that is not widely known. This book popped up on my feed, so I just decided to give it a try. The book follows the character George Bowling. He's a middle aged insurance salesman who's living in England during the 1930s. He has what I would call a very average middle class life. He has a wife, he has 2 kids. However, he has this sense of lifelessness and emptiness inside of him. In the book, he talks about his upbringings and how he wants to recapture that sense of simplicity and innocence that he had in his childhood. As a result, he goes on this journey to revisit his childhood home. Without spoiling anything additional, he finds that his hometown has really changed dramatically in a way that he did not foresee, and he's really wrestling with the feelings that come from being in that state of shock. This book tackles the themes of the loss of the past, the inevitability of war, the anxieties of modern life, and this illusion that we tell ourselves that we're really in control of our own lives. I really loved this book. I'm always amazed by books that are written many decades ago and they still resonate to the modern times that we're living in today. It made me reflect a lot, and I would say that this is one of his most criminally underrated books. So go ahead and give it a try. Have you ever wondered what would happen if Earth was invaded by aliens, and in order to survive, you need to participate in an intergalactic game show? Oh, and you tag along with your ex-girlfriend's talking cat, who goes by Princess Donut? Well, look no further than Dungeon Crawler Carl. This book is number one in a series of 8, I believe. As a result of this alien invasion, they turn Earth into this multi-layered intergalactic game. The main character is a guy who goes by Carl. He survives this alien invasion of Earth along with his ex-girlfriend's cat, who goes by Princess Donut. Princess Donut gains the ability to talk as a result of this game too, and the dialogue between Carl and Princess Donut is just a joy. The book is essentially the two of them discovering what happened, what the game is all about. They're discovering the rules and what they have to do to essentially survive. And their survival is based on what they do in the game and how popular they are with the viewers around the galaxy. This book was action packed, hilarious. It kept me guessing, and it had its wholesome moments in it as well. Your imagination with the characters just goes wild, and I really love it. But oh boy, does this book get wild. Very wild. Think drug dealing llamas, goblins, absurd powers, and that's just to name a few. I would describe the book as a blend of role playing, sci fi, fantasy kind of blended into one. If you like either one of those things, or maybe you just enjoy some gaming, I think this book is for you. Will I read the rest of the books in this series? Well, I'm not 100% sure yet. There's other books on my list I really want to get to, but I really found this book very enjoyable. It definitely lives up to the hype, and I'm really glad that I took the plunge and read this. Highly recommend it. In honor of Black History Month, I wanted to read something to commemorate the month. I finally decided on this book, and I went in completely blind, not knowing what to expect. I can describe it as the strangest, wackiest, funniest, yet equally unsettling book I've ever read. I'm talking about The Sellout by Paul Beatty. From the first few pages, I knew right away I was about to read something unconventional, a little bit wacky, but I was not prepared by how much this book made me feel mentally stimulated and it made me reflective. The novel begins with the main character, our narrator, being the plaintiff in a high profile Supreme Court case. He lives in a fictional, forgotten, impoverished California community in the Los Angeles area called Dickens. With the death of the main character's father and his community essentially being erased from the map, he tries to tackle the issue of racial injustice by uh, reinstituting slavery and resegregating his hometown. Now, before I lose you, try not to see this as a literal endorsement of these horrible practices. It is meant to be a satire plot that aims to critique the complacity of post racial America. You are confronted with these offensive and taboo instances to show how far society has really not come in some ways. It's that argument that systematic injustices of segregation and slavery never really went away. It just took on different forms. For a book so wacky, it really tackles so many issues so brilliantly. This is my first 5-star book of the month. This book had me stewing in my thoughts and feelings for a very long time. I remember feeling so many emotions reading this. I still think about this book randomly at times. All I can say is buckle up and give it a try. You're not going to regret reading this. Just prepare to be blown away by some of the wackiness. Do you ever imagine what it must have felt like going down the mighty Mississippi River in the Old South in the early 1800s? What if I told you one of those characters was a runaway slave and the other character was a country boy from Missouri? After the Sellout, I wanted to continue to ride the wave of Black History Month literature, and this has led me to this book, James. You may know the main character of James as Jim from Huckleberry Finn. This book is essentially the story of Huckleberry Finn, however, it's told from the perspective of Jim. James and the other slaves in this book are a lot more sophisticated than the masters have imagined. James and Huck go on this odyssey down the mighty Mississippi River, and it's just such an epic, epic journey. They both learn from each other and they both need each other in order to really survive this journey. James' story is just so epic when you read along in this book. You can't help but root for him as he tries to not only get freedom for himself, but his family. I really loved this book. This book has made me want to reread Huckleberry Finn. It's been since high school since I read that book, so reading this has definitely made me want to reread that again just to get that different perspective. As heavy as the theme of slavery is in this book, there's a lot of humor in it as well. The dialogue between some of the characters is just so well done and just brilliant. Second five-star review of the month. Really enjoyable read, and I hope you check it out. Some books are driven by a really epic story, and some books are just driven by the people in the book. Cannery Row by John Steinbeck is definitely the latter. Usually I would give an overview of the plot, but this book does not really have a traditional plot. Instead of following a story, you're sort of following this journey of these different characters in this town called Cannery Row, which is located in coastal California during the Great Depression. As you can imagine, based on the timeline of this book, a lot of the characters are not in the best financial situation. A lot of them are laborers, a lot of them are drifters, just trying to make ends meet at the end of the day. The main character, if you want to call him that, is this marine biologist who goes by Doc, and he associates with these group of men who are really good-hearted, yet they cause a lot of trouble. And their relationship throughout the book is what really drives it home. Again, try not to focus too heavily on the plot because I think the author was trying to get to us was instead focusing on the characters of the book. Despite all the harsh conditions and the hardships that these characters face, there's still some beauty and even humor in them. What really struck me in the heart when reading this book was that some of the characters just genuinely care for each other. Community is definitely not something that's lacking in Cannery Row. They may show it in unconventional ways, but at the end of the day, they really do care for one another, and it's just so beautiful. By the end of the book, I didn't really see Cannery Row as just this location in coastal California. It became like this whole new world in a way. For a book that lacks a traditional plot, it really makes you feel attached to the characters and their lives. Just a beautifully well done book, and it feels just like a warm blanket. Can't recommend this book enough. Check it out. After reading a lot of the famous works of Cormac McCarthy, I thought I was going to take a break for him. However, just like Michael Corleone in The Godfather, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. That's kind of how I felt with Cormac McCarthy, and this is what led me to Outer Dark. I didn't really know where to continue my McCarthy journey after finishing his classics like The Road, All the Pretty Horses, and Blood Meridian. After going to my local bookstore and spending way too much time just kind of staring at the shelf, contemplating what to read next, I finally just picked up Outer Dark, not knowing what really to expect. For such a short book, I didn't think it would leave such an unsettling mark on me. But at the same time, I shouldn't have been too shocked. I mean, it is a McCarthy book after all. This book takes place in an isolated Appalachian region in eastern Tennessee. There is a brother and sister who give birth to this child. The brother doesn't want the baby and decides to leave it in the woods. However, the baby is taken and the brother and sister separate. The sister is setting out to find the child while the brother is just kind of wandering around. And I would argue he's really just trying to outrun his guilt and shame of the past. They both feel like aliens in a way, wandering this foreign, unforgiving world that's surrounding them. You follow both the brother and the sister in the book and these three mysterious men who appear in random parts of the book. What blew me away was the description of the book's setting. You can almost feel like something is just wrong and off with the setting of this book. The landscape and the world around them is just so unforgiving based on just the dark description of it. The theme of innocence versus corruption is present in this book. This book makes you tackle the presence of evil, isolation, human morality, and just the consequences of our actions. If you were to ask me the key message of this book, I think the key message of this book is your sins will eventually find you, no matter how far you run away from them. In classic McCarthy fashion, this is a really disturbing book. However, it's really short and easy to read. If anything, it'll leave a mark on you that'll make you think. So don't be turned off too much by the disturbing nature of the book. It is a good book at the end of the day, so definitely give it a try, especially if you're a McCarthy fan. If someone were to ask you, what are some things you wish you could experience for the first time in your life again? What would you say? For me, a few answers come to my mind. Watching season one of True Detective, my first international trip, or trying a food for the first time, just to name a few. However, I can add a new answer to that question, and that is reading East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Man, do not get me wrong, I am so glad that I decided to read this, but at the same time, I feel a little conflicted. And that's mainly because I may have just read the best book of the year, and it's only March. This book is an epic generational saga that follows two families, the Hamiltons and the Trasts, whose stories ultimately interweave in the Salinas Valley in California. If you are familiar with the book of Genesis in the Bible, especially the Cain and Abel story, this book is essentially a reimagination of it. The book's timeline begins in the late 1800s and it goes all the way to the end of World War I. The characters in this book grow and make a series of choices that really shape not just their lives, but the events of the book. The characters wrestle with so many heavy themes like love, jealousy, child parent relationships, and seeking acceptance for those who matter to us the most. However, if I had to summarize what East of Eden is really all about at the end of the day, I would say it's about free will and the conflict of good and evil. Are we destined to repeat the past? Are some people born good or evil? Or do we have the power to choose who we ultimately become? Man, this book blends so many things together. On one hand, it's a descriptive portrait of two families. On the other hand, it's really this meditation of the human condition. Such a deep story, and I feel like my description of it does not really give it the justice it deserves because it is just brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant. 6 stars out of 5. Just brilliant. No question about it, this is a 5-star read for me. Do not let the 600 plus pages scare you because every one of these pages is just so brilliantly well done. The journey this book takes you on leaves you a different person at the end of the day after you finish it. I can honestly say that this book is now probably my top three favorite books of all time. I don't know if it's number one yet, and in no particular order, but I must say that this is definitely a top three book of all time for me. Must read, can't say enough about it. Have you ever read something that just made your skin crawl from beginning to end? It brings up questions on what it means to be a human being and when we can be seen as less than human in some ways based on our actions. I'm talking about Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. Despite the name of this book, I found myself wondering if God was really missing during this book. This is mainly because this is probably one of the most disturbing, darkest books I've ever read. Yet, like most McCarthy books, it really makes you think. This book follows a character called Lester Ballard, an outcast that's living in the Appalachian parts of eastern Tennessee. Lester checks most of the boxes of what it means to be an outcast. He's poor, he's isolated, kind of weird, and goes against the grain of society. You watch him drift further and further away from humanity in this book. Just a little warning about this book is going to make you really uncomfortable. Some of Lester's actions are just downright disturbing. No ifs, ands, and buts. Downright disturbing. However, what I think McCarthy is really trying to challenge us at the end of the day is that Lester is really not a monster despite his actions in the book. He is human who is shaped by the environment around him that turns him into a monster, if you will. That environment is one of loneliness, rejection, and sometimes just lack of compassion from society. Like I said, this book is really not for the faint of heart. There are times where I had to take a mental break from reading this because it was just too much, too heavy, too raw. It's not everyone's cup of tea. However, if you really like dark fiction and you want to challenge yourself as a reader by tackling something that's really raw and just downright disturbing, I think it's worth the read. Plus, this book is pretty short. I got by it in 2 days. Check it out if you want. All right, last but certainly not least, I want to close with one of my favorite reads of the year. I'm talking about Five Decembers. This is a murder mystery book, but we learn that it's so much more than that. This book takes place in 1941 and it follows Joe McGrady. He's a detective for the Honolulu Police Department. McGrady is assigned to investigate a brutal double murder on the island. However, like all good crime novels, the case really spirals into something bigger. If you're a fan of history, you can guess what happened in Hawaii in 1941. Pearl Harbor is attacked right as McGrady is immersing himself deep in the case. McGrady finds himself in Asia, and he's pulled into the chaos that is World War II. As a result, this murder case that really has just been consuming his life kind of gets pushed to the side and for the time being as he's trying to navigate and survive this really delicate situation known as World War II in Asia, being an American in Asia. Yet, despite this setback, McGrady never forgets the case, and he's really determined to bring it to a close despite all the obstacles that are thrown in front of him, especially the World War. I loved this book. Throughout the story, you feel the tension and uncertainty from the case to the war in all phases. Joe was a really awesome, authentic character. What I really loved about Joe was he was just himself. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He had setbacks, but he continues to grow and move forward. By the end of the day, he's really not the same person. He really has grown and developed as a character. This book is a thriller, but just keep in mind it's a little slower than what a typical thriller is. However, I would argue that makes the story so much better because everything seems to weigh more heavily on the characters, every action, every loss, every moment. This book is part thriller, part crime, part mystery, and part historical fiction. You feel immersed in the world, emotionally drawn to the case, and the story is just brilliant. One of my favorite books of the year, highly recommend it. Check it out. Well, that is the end of my book review for the month of February. Like I said before, it was a really great month of reading, and I really enjoyed all the books that I read, and I really look forward to see what March will bring. But until next time, stay safe and happy reading.